I don't see John on or Dan.
Not yet, and we need
Commissioner Kutz is still
Yeah.
out, right?
all right, we're on YouTube.
Okay. I don't see John on or Dan.
Not yet.
And we need Commissioner Kutz is still out, right?
I just have to remember to turn the video, the sound off of YouTube when I have it running concurrently. You guys will hear a 15-second repeat.
Oh yeah, turn the mute off. Mute it on the other one, or else it'll drive me crazy.
I did.
All right.
That's what I'm saying. I always forget to do that until the first time I hear myself talking 15 minutes.
All right,
I remember.
go.
Okay. Tony's in.
Our volume okay, Aaron? Okay.
There's John.
Mr. Deven.
Good evening.
Mr. Eby. All right, folks, I think we're going to get rolling here.
Okay. Aaron, you want to hit the record?
Hey, we're recording.
Hi, I'm officially calling this meeting of the Lower Allen Township Board of Commissioners, regular meeting of May 11th, 2020 to order. Proof of publication of this meeting is available. We're glad that you could join us this evening. Before we start our meeting, we will say a prayer and a pledge of allegiance. And just prior to that, I would like to cover a couple ground rules for this evening. Obviously, this is our third Zoom meeting, and there's a host to this meeting. Her name is, it's our assistant manager, Erin Trone. So if you have any questions, you can use the raise your hand icon on your computer, and she will be able to field your questions and make sure that your questions get to us at some point in the meeting. Throughout the meeting, there will be times on the agenda that you will be able to participate in this meeting as well. And again, we welcome our residents, the public, and any others that are joining us tonight. With the COVID crisis, we've been forced to do things differently, but we still have to conduct the business of the township. And we've been doing Zoom meetings. So there's a couple things that when we do these meetings, we like to make sure that we have you understand. When you attend meetings, originally your video will be shut off. And then at some point, if you need to comment in the meeting, you would notify our host and she'll make sure that your comment gets through to us. We realize that this could be an inconvenience to some, but we are clearly doing our best to try to make sure that we can get the business to the township done in the most transparent way that we can. So if you'll put your heads with me, we'll say a prayer before we start our meeting. We pray this day to give thanks for all the many blessings bestowed upon our township. Watch over us who are entrusted with the administration of this township. Create in us the earnest desire to serve faithfully and permit us to experience the joys of noble service completed for our residents. Encourage cooperation from those who are served and from those who serve. Heavenly Father, we ask your guidance to help us as commissioners to make the right decisions. We ask that you aid our staff as they perform the daily tasks of running our township. And we request that you be by our first responders as they protect our residents and see that they return home safe at the end of each day. In your name, we pray, amen.
Amen.
Now, if you're able to, if you'd stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance. pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of
United States of America,
and to the
and to the
republic
republic
which
which
stands
stands
one nation,
one nation,
under God,
under God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty and
liberty
justice for
and
all.
justice for all.
At this time in the meeting, I read this evening on Facebook, as some of you may know, Mayor Doug Morrow of New Cumberland has been hospitalized recently. And so we'd like to extend our thoughts and our prayers to give Doug and his family strength in this time of crisis that they're going through. It's my understanding that Doug is stabilized. That's what I read. So our prayers go out to Doug and his family. Commissioners, in our packets this week, we received minutes from April 27th, 2020, the regular meeting. And if there's any questions, let them be known now, or changes or comments. Otherwise, I would be seeking a motion to accept the minutes from the April 27th meeting.
Move we accept the minutes as presented.
I have a motion from Commissioner Shin.
Second.
I have a second from Vice President Black.
That was from
That
Commissioner.
was Thomas Kutz.
Oh, I beg your pardon. I have a second from Commissioner Kutz. Welcome, Mr. Kutz.
Thank you. Sorry, I had difficulties with my audio and video getting in.
You betcha. Therefore, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. And may I note that Commissioner Holtzman is absent this evening with excuse. It's my understanding she is ill. So we will move on. On our agenda this evening, and this is for any commissioner, anybody in the staff, or anybody that is with us this evening, if there's any item on our agenda that you would like to speak of or speak about, please let the host know at this time. You'll have an opportunity to talk about that item when it comes up on the agenda. And we'll just give it a few seconds here to see if anybody responds. Ms. Trone, do we have anybody interested this evening?
I do not. In fact, right now, the only people on this Zoom are staff members and commissioners.
Okay, well, hearing none, we will move on to our bid opening for the detention basin retrofit project. And I understand the manager or the engineer or a combination of the two are going to handle this for us.
Yes, I have the bid here. We only received one bid on this today, so I'm opening it. We have a bid from Malco Landscaping, MALCO.
ALCO.
We have a bid bond. And we have a bid in the amount of $170,000 and no cents.
170,000 for the detention basin retrofit project. That's our one and only bid.
That is correct. That's actually, I believe, two separate basins. Is that correct, Dan? Two basins.
Okay. Well, we'll see to it that the solicitor gets that.
Yes, I will.
Terrific. Okay, if there's no questions on this, I would like to move. Okay, under your president, we have a check register of May 8th, 2020 in the amount of $293,044.11. You're looking for a motion to accept the check register of May 8th.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Vice President Black and a second from Commissioner Shin. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries 4-0. Next, which is 6B on the agenda. I'm looking to accept the motion to adopt Resolution 2020 R17, resolution of the Board of Commissioners of Lower Allen Township, Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, proclaiming May 2020 as Building Safety Month.
So moved.
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Shin, right?
Yes.
It was me and then Black.
And I have a second from Vice.
I could take a second. That's all right.
I have a motion from Vice President Black and a second from Commissioner Shin.
That's fine.
Is that what it is?
Yes.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Moving on to C. This is to accept the motion to adopt Resolution 2020 R18, a resolution of the Board of Commissioners of Lower Allen Township, Cumberland County, Pennsylvania, adopting property tax relief measures under Pennsylvania Act 15 of 2020.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Kutz and a second from Commissioner Shin. Is there any discussion on this item? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. At this point on our agenda, if there's any business pertinent to the township, discussions will be limited to 15 minutes per person. And unless somebody has joined the meeting, I would just open this up to the panel we have tonight. Okay, we'll move on to number 8. If anybody joins us, Ms. Trone, just let us know. And if they would like to speak, I'd like to give them an opportunity. Not everybody can get in on time.
Sure.
Under our township engineer, I guess we'll turn it over to Mr. Flint.
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. I recall at a recent meeting, the board awarded a contract for microsurfacing work on Hartsdale Drive and authorized us to seek bids for similar work on Wilson Lane. The amount is actually under the bidding threshold, so we sought price quotes. We requested price quotes from 3 contractors for the Wilson Lane. We received the price from 1 contractor who is the same successful contractor from the Hartsdale Drive project. And as such, the price was actually a few $1,000s lower, even though the work and the quantity was similar. So that kind of paid off, having the ability for the successful contractor or one to bid on the next project as well. So there's a recommendation in the memo in your packet to award that work to Stewart and Tate, incorporated in the amount of $15,975. Be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioners, do we have any questions for Mr. Flint?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we award the unit price contract in the estimated total of $15,975.00 for Wilson Lane microsurfacing to Stewart and Tate Incorporated.
Second.
I have a motion on the question by Commissioner Black and a second from Commissioner Shin. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Moving on to number 9, public safety. I would imagine, Director, you're going to handle most, if not all of this, correct?
I will, sir, yes. So I'm checking my mute. I'm good. So there's a number of items before you on the agenda tonight. The first, under A, is a discussion and possible action for the activation of the Civil Service Commission. Commissioners would remember that I had requested activation for authorizations to do a new eligibility list for police officer. The board had approved that, and the commission, just before we went into COVID lockdown, had met and approved that, and we were all set for the March 30th test when that whole thing kind of fell apart. So we still have that authorization, and we're going to be moving forward as soon as we know when we can get on a property someplace to do that test. But I don't anticipate that's going to be much before the end of the summer, beginning of the fall. But this is a second action. This is for activation of the commission to establish a list for lieutenant and a list for essentially for corporal as well. As the board recalls, within the budget is the salary for 2 lieutenants because we would have Lieutenant Thomas, who currently is in the position, his salary for this year, plus looking at before the end of the year doing a promotion for a second position that would be a lieutenant. And then that would be essentially because Lieutenant Thomas, as everybody knows, is retiring next spring. So we're looking at bringing somebody on board early to kind of shadow him. And then that would move us into 2021 as well with ultimately 2 lieutenants in the position. So this would be for activation of the commission to authorize us to move forward to do testing to create a lieutenant's list. We would do the corporal's list at the same time because we believe that at least one of those positions would come out of our current corporal rank, which would make it necessary for us to test and to promote into the corporal rank too. If not this year, then next year. But the list would be active for a year if the board would approve this action to move forward.
Mr. President, I have a couple of questions.
Commissioner Shin, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Director, is Lieutenant Thomas on the drop program now?
He is.
All right. But when,
April of next year, he has to leave us in
right,
retirement.
so he will not be working at all after April.
Now, in fact, he has plans to move out of state at this point.
Well, how about that?
Yeah,
Do that much to him, do we? To spoil him.
to some sunshine area of our great country.
The applicant, won't all these, because these are promotions, won't all these applicants come from in-house?
Yes.
So they will be. All right. I was interested, you're looking to create these tests. Wouldn't they be standardized tests, Dave, that would be given over the, I mean, I don't understand, maybe you can help me understand this vernacular. You're creating a test. I'm not sure I understand that.
Well, part of it is standardized. We use Standard Associates, which is the same testing company that we use for police officer positions, but they also have a promotional test, and we use that as the base test. But in the last promotion for corporal and the last promotion for sergeant, actually when we promoted Sergeant Foltz, we do a supplemental piece to that on policy and procedure, so that there is a, and that's the creation part. Now we may be able to utilize that same array, just kind of mix it up a little bit and maybe change some of it, but that's the creation part. But the base test is by standard STANARD, Standard Associates.
I see. And we'll be replacing the sergeant then when this sergeant gets promoted?
We're hopeful that Sergeant Foltz would qualify for this position in the testing process. So we would not be replacing that. That's actually not a line item in the budget, just the 2.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Director Hall, I kind of know the answer to this in the language of the memo that was given to us, that we're going to be adding a minor, I think it's a minor change. Can you just speak to that minor change? I'm assuming that's what that was supposed to be, a minor change.
Right.
Rules, right?
It operationally, it really doesn't change things. It just puts us in the position of having 2 lieutenants. We used to have we had 2 lieutenants before Captain Crone got promoted. When he got promoted to captain, we went to the platoon system of 4 platoons. We needed another corporal. So we didn't have the money in the budget at the time to do 2 lieutenants plus the other corporal. And so what we did at that point was we took some of that money and put a sergeant's position in. But really they're both division commanders, and the rightful structure is to have 2 lieutenants, each one of them in charge of a division. So we want to try to get back to where that was.
Mr. President, I think I missed one of my questions. If I could get another bite out of the apple here.
Commissioner Shin?
And your question prompted my question to look, the change, your memo, Director Hall, talks about an activation of a commission because you're requesting them to consider a minor change to their rules concerning extension of probationary status. This isn't new, isn't it? I mean, we've had this over the years. Why is this now?
No. This part, there's an additional part that's changed to the rules, and that's the 12-month period. So the first part, the first 2 paragraphs actually speak to the lieutenant's test. That 3rd paragraph asking them for rule changes, because right now what happens is the probationary period is 12 months. If we have a probationary officer now that it looks as though he's going to be called up into military service on a deployment. So what that would do is put him into that deployment status with the military while he's on probation. So his probation would expire while he's on deployment. So what this rule would request is that we allow 12 months, and if you get some type of leave status like that, like a military deployment during your probation, you don't just basically earn it while you're away. You have to come back, and
That's what we've been doing all along, letting them earn it while they're away. Is that what you're saying?
No, we've not. That's the problem. And when Leon and I looked at this, we realized that it basically, the contract stands moot. It really becomes a question of what the rules say. And we looked at the civil service rules, and the rules basically say 12 months. They have no provision in the civil service rules currently to provide for somebody that's on a leave status, an extended leave. Now, it doesn't apply to vacation and those kind of things, but extended deployment, military deployment, if you're called up and you don't have a choice, you have to go. Your probation just expires while you're away. And we didn't think that was a good thing.
What I'm saying is, over the years, that has happened.
We've never, Commissioner, we've never had that happen before. We've never had someone in the police department deployed during their probationary period or go on FMLA. So this is to prevent that from happening.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That clears it up for me. Thank you both.
Yeah, it'd be like a short little 1-paragraph addition to the existing rules. So, and that would come before the board as long as the commission approves it.
I just thought it was not all that unique, and I'm sure it had to have happened before, but the captain clears me up on that. Thank you. Thank you. I'm good.
So to be crystal clear, if we were to take any action tonight, it would be to activate the Civil Service Commission. At that point, it's not like we're making any other formal commitments or anything like that at this point.
We would have to go through the process of developing the tests, doing the tests, and coming back to the board at some point in the future for acceptance of the lists that are put forward and for the rule change. And quite frankly, with us still being in red lockdown, I don't think we're going to ask the commission to come in. So it's just getting your formal approval so we can do that at whatever point that we can.
Okay. When do you foresee that happening, Director?
Opening up?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're going to do it as soon as we open up, I assume then?
Right.
Authorization?
Right.
Okay. So within maybe a couple of months.
Hopefully not that long, but
Yeah.
you know, it's out of all of our hands, I guess.
Any other questions for the director?
Mr. President, I have a question.
Commissioner Kutz, floor is yours.
Director Hall, I'm just a little fuzzy on why, on the change to the 2-lieutenant structure, And I'm just wondering if you could clear that up quickly for me. So you're saying right now, obviously I have a lieutenant and sergeant and 4 platoons underneath that. So you're changing more to a 2-division structure instead of a 4 platoon structure?
Now, we have a 2-division structure now, Commissioner.
Okay.
What it would do is basically put a lieutenant, someone of the rank of lieutenant in charge of each one of those divisions. Right now, it's a lieutenant in charge of the one division, but a sergeant in charge of the other division. So it equalizes out the rank structure, which is where we were before. We changed it because at the point we didn't have the money. And now it's pretty much between the sergeant and where the lieutenant is. It's not that significant amount of difference. So it just makes more sense that they be basically of the same rank to be in charge of divisions.
What's the difference funding wise between having this structure now and adding a second lieutenant?
I think it's only, Len, you can help me on this. It's only probably around 5,000, I think.
That's correct. It's a 5% differential.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm prepared to move on this.
Okay, hearing no other questions, President or Vice President Black, you satisfied with your?
With the presentation by Director Hall? Yes,
Yeah.
I am. Yeah.
Okay, I think looking for, I'm assuming Director, you'd be looking for some action potentially tonight on this.
If the board so is willing, at least it allows us when we can to move forward with activating the commission for these 2 points.
Hey, you need a motion to activate the Civil Service Commission.
So commissioners, I'd be looking for a motion to activate the Civil Service Commission based on the information that we've had presented to us.
I will make that motion.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Black and a second from Commissioner Shin.
Yes.
Any further questions or discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries 4-0. Thank you, Director, for walking us through that.
Certainly. B under public safety is discussion and possible action for the purchase of Stryker stretchers. It's rather an extensive memo that Captain Deven put together. This has been an ongoing issue that I've kind of dealt with even previous to him. We didn't realize it at the time it was the cause, but we had in 174, which is the ambulance that's about to be traded in hopefully in June. We had replaced a floor because of indentations to that floor and that stretcher. Pretty significant cost. We're noticing the same indentations in 374 now. And when we started examining that, along with everything that he outlines, and I think really the critical piece is taking a look at the risk injury portions of his memo, in that we have had, because of the weight of these stretchers, the current Furnos, we've had a number of employees since I've been here off on shoulder-related injuries as a result of the pull injuries associated with that. And I think he details that. He researched that with Donna Paul and came up with those numbers. So there's an issue with that, and there's also an issue with the way that these things ride and the way they go in and the way they attach. Like I said, I think he did a pretty good job detailing what the issues are. So when we looked at what the solution to that was, essentially, it was to replace the Furnos with another stretcher brand called a Stryker, which is utilized almost exclusively in the industry right now because it's less weight, it's more stable, and all the reasons he listed under his advantages to the Stryker thing. So the issue is we said, well, okay, so when we realized this, we ordered the new ambulance that's coming in with a Stryker. So it has the Stryker as a part of the purchase of that ambulance. So what we said, well, that leaves 2 that we would need to replace, the one for 274 and the one for 374. And so we went to Stryker and we got the cost of that. And Captain did a nice job reaching out to a company called JJJ Stretchers Inc. and got a price for the purchase of the existing three, the two that we would have out of the purchase plus the trade-in of the one that we're getting for the new ambulance, and came up with a $15,000 deal where they will buy them for $15,000. And then we reached out and got two different options. One option was a lease agreement with Stryker. The other option was a flat out purchase with Stryker. We met with, and Rick can weigh in on this, but we had met with the finance director and the manager. And the finance director's position was that he thought that the purchase was the better option. And the least, even though they're expensive stretchers, it's the better option than the lease option. So before you tonight is our request to take a look at for possible discussion and action on the purchase of two replacement Stryker stretchers for all of the reasons detailed in the memo, in my memo to you, and then in Captain Devon's investigation report that he provided to me.
Commissioners, any questions on this item?
The only question I have, Mr. President, the three stretchers, David, are $83,000 and change, correct?
No, that's only two. The third one for the third ambulance is coming as a part of the purchase of the replacement for 174.
Okay, then selling the three stretchers, we get a $15,000 credit and it comes out to a difference of $68,000 and change, right?
Correct. That would be the difference after you the totals that 83,766.56, and when you take the 15,000 off of that, the net outlay is 68,766.56.
Right.
Right.
Tom, is that in the budget at this point?
Good question.
It is not in the budget. The cost of the ambulance is in the budget, but the two stretchers are not. It was not contemplated during budget that we were going to replace them. However, when the company that we're purchasing the ambulance or the stretchers from, the company that sells the Stryker, offered us a deal on these other two, and I even contemplated not putting this on the agenda because of the issues we're looking at right now with the reductions in taxes, but we are facing some issues, safety issues with the Furno. When we bought them several years ago, they were called power litters, and they were supposed to reduce back injuries by allowing the litter to lift up with battery power. The downside is they're very heavy, and when the battery goes dead, they have to be lifted manually. As the director mentioned, they're actually putting some indentations in the floor of the ambulance, so heavy, and they have caused a couple of shoulder injuries from people trying to pull those stretchers. So we can wait, put them in the 2021 budget, or we can go ahead and get them this year all together, the deal that the company's offering us. Again, we looked at possibly leasing them, but Director Grove thought, we have the money in fund balance right now. It will cost us less money in the long run to purchase them outright rather than lease them.
So should the employees be pulling these stretchers, or do they do that when the batteries fail? Am I putting two and two together there?
They have to pull them to make the move. The battery only lifts it, so it doesn't have a drive. It doesn't have, it's like a drive belt, a drivetrain that helps them when they're wheeling it.
Is it a training issue? I mean, is there a way to do this so you don't get hurt and maybe we're being relaxed, or?
We've had Tony do the training, and he might want to comment on that because it's the way the litters are designed. It's the weight of the litter. You can train but that doesn't take that piece away.
I know a couple of years ago, this thing was supposed to do everything but make coffee, and we were all excited about it.
Yeah. That's what I was told when I came too, Commissioner. But the history as detailed here has proven that not to be correct.
Mhm.
In regards to the training issue, Commissioner, all of that was done extensively, actually, in July of 2019, because I was new to the organization and hadn't used them. I spent a lot of time actually training myself on and finding out that there were some training deficiencies as I was going through that process, which were corrected, and all the new staff that was brought on was trained to that level. This is a design issue. It's really no matter what we do, we're literally pulling, as my memo details, extra weight all of the time. And that creates problems that even at our best, we cannot mitigate, which is the foundation of the problem. There's a chart in my memo that goes through the amount of extra weight a lower Allen employee will take care of versus a competitor with a striker stretcher. The difference is the way these load and unload, and the Furno stretcher is incorporated into one system bearing all the weight. A striker stretcher has two different systems so that you don't have to always carry the extra weight around. And when you have to manually lose, as the township manager said, when you have to manually lift a Furno, it's much more complicated than a striker stretcher that has independent systems to prevent failures like that.
How will the new stretchers do the stair climbing? I was noticing that in particular.
First of all, they don't stair climb, and neither do the stretchers we currently have. The stair climbing feature is ineffective, just a lot of PR. You can make it stair climb if you have exactly the same depth and dimension of steps. There's not one old home in Lower Allen Township, or new home for that matter, that has that ability. It's not that perfect. That is an oversell of a feature that never existed.
Well, there are 5 steps from my front door and then a little lip going into the house.
Right.
Unlike I'm not going to Bethany Village or something where I'm sure you're going to want them to take elevators. But they're going to have to climb those steps, aren't they?
Well, so neither stretcher should be ever used to do that. So that's a stair chair. That's a different operation. But that's a stair chair that is designed to go up and down steps for that operation. The stretchers are not designed. I mean, well, the Furno says it'll go up and down steps, but it should not, and it's not. And its design features do not do as advertised, and that's demonstrated by the incredible amount of maintenance issues we've had. This week or last week on Friday, the Friday crew literally spent 3 hours cleaning wheels of Furno stretchers because they've learned how to take them apart and clean them, because those wheels bind up because they're an open caster system versus strikers that are not. So not only do you have an overweight, you also then have binding up of the wheels due to dirt, carbon fibers, and everything else.
Okay.
You'll see, Commissioner, you'll see the crews basically park that stretcher at a residence outside. And they'll either use the stair chair to remove the patient, or they'll use a different style of a litter that they can carry the patient out and then put them on that stretcher, and then they can wheel the stretcher to the ambulance. So it just depends upon what they confront when they get to residence as to what they call extricating that patient from the residence itself first.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I had the stair chair demonstrated in my home, and it worked super.
I'm hoping I don't get to see it that way, Ed.
Yeah.
The only other thing that's worth mentioning here, The only other thing that's worth mentioning here is certainly understand the budget crunch, and I get that totally, but the only positive of the COVID is it's about a $10,000 savings by purchasing now, because the purchase price literally went down $10,000 due to Stryker being in the federal purchase program. So that's part of the quote.
So, Tom, are you and Rick in agreement that now is an appropriate time to make a motion to buy these stretchers?
In balance, I would say yes. As I said before, I had my concerns because of the budget situation with the lockdown, but in the long run, this does save us money. And not only in equipment costs, but in potential workers' comp claims as well.
I would agree that if you're going to buy them, now would be the time, financially speaking.
Well, if we use fund balance as a plan, are there plans to replace that money in the fund balance so we don't deplete?
Well, it's a very minute chunk of the fund balance, and we would not have a plan to replace it, because if we didn't purchase them this year, they would just be in next year's budget, which you know, expenses and revenues all contribute to the fund balance. It all comes out even in the end.
I have to admit, when I saw this item over the weekend, I was really hoping and praying that it was all budgeted and I was misunderstanding it, and secondly, that perhaps there would be an opportunity to acquire these during this time, maybe to get it reimbursed. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that's not the case. So I guess my question, Director, and perhaps Captain Deven, would be, if this was not an option to get these, because I understand we're getting one of the three with the ambulance, correct?
Correct.
But we don't currently have it, and we're not currently using any version of the stretcher at this time, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we didn't have this opportunity, we'd only be getting one in. And when would we anticipate getting that in?
Last time we talked to the salesman, Commissioner, he's telling us it'll be delivered from the factory the beginning of to Pittsburgh, to their shop, beginning of June. But then
this is the one that's already in queue.
Yes, but it'll be about 2-3 weeks till they outfit it. So I'm anticipating delivery probably by the end of June.
Okay. So I guess my question is now is to either you or the captain, if this wasn't an option to get these, whether delivery issues for extended out or they couldn't make them or something, what would you be doing to mitigate any problems that might start to come up, knowing that you only have one coming, as a bridge, let's say, till you got some opportunity to maybe get it into next year's budget?
We'd be doing the same thing we're doing now. And that's the safety risks don't go away. We can try to mitigate it by the same training that Captain Deven did a year ago, but that, because it's a push-pull problem, you still risk injuries depending upon the situation. And we had, as you see in the detailed memo, we had over the last 2 years, we have employees out extended leave, which then creates other problems, because in the one case, we paid a substantial amount of overtime to backfill that position. So there's a ripple effect that takes place if you don't fix the problem.
And currently, as the director said, the ripple effect, currently with the way we are staffing in an attempt to try to be fiscally responsible with that, our staffing is down 2 full FTEs. So that poses even further challenges, because on some days like today, we're only staffing 3 people to avoid the overtime and avoid the extra cost. So that's just going to be compounded right now, especially with the way things are. But we certainly are going to continue to do everything we can always to prevent injuries. Every day, it doesn't change.
Any other questions,
Mr. President,
Mr. Kutz?
I'm just curious why this wasn't brought up last year during the budget if we knew this was an issue, and why we're doing it middle of the year now and not during a budget process. If we have items that aren't budgeted, I mean, we have a budget process that goes several months and we go over items that we want to include and cut. I'm just curious why this wasn't included in last year's discussion and why it can't wait until this year's discussion.
Well, I think the biggest reason is because we didn't realize the extent of the problem back then. We were still pulling the data from HR. We were still researching that. And we start, and Rick can tell you that we start that whole capital. He has a 5-year plan. So to get it into the 5-year plan would have been more than just last year. We do the SIPs. I'll do the SIPs for 2025 as we start this budget process. So it wasn't just a year. We don't do capital year by year by year. We do it in a 5-year version. So it would not have been included in that 5-year plan unless we would have looked at it 5 years ago, actually.
I'm not piling on, Dave, but that even more surprises me that it hadn't been seen until now. If you're planning 5 years, and I'm sure they didn't all of a sudden start getting backaches.
No, it was actually the 2 injuries. The one EMT that was off for, I don't know, months and months and months. The other EMT that's mentioned in here that was off, that's when we started realizing, hey, where's this coming from? We need to take a look at it. That's when Tony started, I said, look and see why this is happening. Do an investigation into why this is happening. What's the problem here? How can we mitigate it? Is it simply a training thing? And that's what kind of sparked his memo, which he brought to me. And I said, okay, well, we have to take a look at how to fix it. And that memo you see was to me in February the 3rd of 2020. So it was not something that we really had we knew there might be an issue, but it really wasn't on the radar as to a solution of how to fix that issue until beginning of this year.
Shoulder injuries took place in 2019, so it wasn't anything that was that had been ongoing to generate closer inspection.
Tom, how long have we had this heavy structure?
Had them about 6 years. Is that right?
I think they were purchased before I came, so a year or two.
Yeah, we've had them for quite some time. They were in the original 5-year plan, and I believe Frank Williamson was here. It was before we got ALS of our own, I believe. So we're going back several years.
It kills me. Time just flies. You don't realize. Well, I'm not into beating dead horses. I don't particularly relish the idea that we have the money, but we didn't have it in the budget. But I think we need to be concerned about the injury, and your Captain, your report was compelling, I think. I just need a little help in the motion that we're looking for, Mr. President. We're looking at purchasing 2 Stryker stretchers. Is that right?
That's what is being proposed in the memo.
Okay. Well, based on, go ahead.
That's all right. It's my understanding the net impact on the budget that that would be a deficit, I guess, so to speak, and that's not budgeted is about $68,000.
All right. So the motion would be to authorize the purchase of 2 Stryker stretchers with a net cost not to exceed $68,766.56.
Commissioner, if I may interrupt, could you also add in your motion that we would trade in?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought of that and it didn't come out. Yes, and that would include a $15,000 trade-in of the stretchers that we're finding to be a problem for us.
And that's 3 Furno stretchers.
2 Furnos, 3 Furno stretchers. Yeah, I guess so.
We did trade in.
Trade in, yeah.
And I will second that motion.
Mr. President.
Okay, I have Mr. Kutz.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Brief discussion. So, Director, am I to understand this would have been in this upcoming budget that we would consider in the fall, but there's a little urgency and a price and a little discount, so that's why we're seeing it ahead of time rather than waiting?
I think we would have to have proposed it for this budget in the fall, given what you read in the memo. Yes.
So right. So either way, it would have been included in this year's budget. And this is something that's at the top of your priority list.
On the EMS side, this I think is essential for patient liability purposes as well as for staff injury remediation.
Yeah, we read in Captain Devan's report that even there's some patient issues, right? And they feel
Correct.
they don't fit on it, I think, right?
Now that's one of the problems. Also, because it sits so high. You saw that one picture.
Yeah.
How high it sits. That there's the potential that if it tips, your two EMTs are not going to stop that litter from falling over and from the patient from being injured. So there's some liabilities that are associated with it as well.
If I may, back when we bought these things, Commissioner Shin is right. They were presented as they were the latest and greatest thing. And, the self-rising, was sold, and it did help with back injuries of having to lift. But as with a lot of new things, the bugs don't start coming out until you put it into use for a while. So, I mean, had we known then what we know now, we probably wouldn't have purchased them, but we did. They were useful for a while, but there's something better now. I'll also say that we, and Director Hall and I discussed this, is I know we're looking at expenditure cuts because of the shutdown, but we will also continue to look for those reductions in other areas in order to try to offset this $68,000 as much as possible.
That's nice to hear.
And that's what I was going to add. Adding to Commissioner Kutz's comments, I kind of agree. If this was going to be added into the budget, it would be really difficult from health and safety standpoint for us to check this item in the next budget. And I get that, and your presentation's well received. I would just encourage that if we can make a note of this, I'm sure it'll be in the minutes, that we do our best, obviously. And I know, Mr. Manager, you do a great job for us. Keep an eye on the finances, and Director Grove. Make a note here that we do want to try to find this and not necessarily just assume that we're going to take it from our fund balance. If it turns out that we are just going to take it, I do want that noted somewhere when we see that fund balance go down a little bit, because this is a pretty significant purchase over and above budgeting. And I think it's important that we remain really vigilant to our taxpayers on that issue. So that's all I have to say about it. I believe that is something that's needed, and I appreciate the presentation that you guys put forward.
Call for the question, Mr. President.
Commissioner Kutz.
I'll take that back. Go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just like to briefly conclude on my comments. I thank you for your sentiment there. That's exactly where I'm coming from, is this, and Captain Devan walked me through this in January and showed me the issues they were having with the current model now. But I just would like to note, I support the need for this. But in return, I would like staff to take note that this was to be included in the fall's budget, and that amount should be reflected when the budget requests come in, that we've already made this purchase looking towards next year, and it's not to be an additional purchase for the fund balance. But if it was something to be requested, then perhaps that budget request would come in less $68,000 what it would have been. And obviously, we will need to trust the manager and finance director to do that. But as long as we have that assurance, I'm comfortable moving forward.
I can assure you also, Commissioner, that we're looking at this year's budget with a lot of scrutiny, because we understand the problem is now on the revenue side. And I think we've identified some pretty significant overall expenditures that will come in less than what was in the current 2020 budget. So I'm thinking if we take a look at it across the entire public safety spectrum, we should be able to compensate for that, if not put a pretty good dent in it this year. And I hear what you're saying, and we certainly will pledge to do that.
And I do appreciate it, Director, and Captain Devan, your remarks on what you're doing as well to mitigate in terms of staffing and avoiding overtime. It's not unnoticed, and I appreciate, the spreadsheet we got with the things that you're willing to do to help us out. I think from our perspective, we just want to make sure we're being vigilant with taxpayer dollars, with ensuring that you guys have the tools you need to succeed. It sounds like this is a tool you need to succeed. And so it's just a matter of balancing those two, but we do certainly appreciate your efforts and appreciate your comments.
Off for the question, Mr. President.
Thank you. Yes, sir. So therefore, we are going to call for the question on this item. And all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The motion carries 4-0. And just one last comment. Thank you, Captain Deven, Director Hall, and everybody involved for giving us comprehensive information. And I think we all were able to fill in the gaps this evening in this good conversation that we had to make sure that our employees and our residents remain as safe as possible. And again, thank you for being vigilant about getting those stretchers so that we can move forward as safely as possible. Thank you. Director Hall?
Commissioner, item C is discussion of possible action on the retirement of Officer Kurt Heckler. In your packet was his letter dated May the 8th, where he said, please accept this notification that I will be retiring from my position as a police officer with Lower Allen Township effective May 8th, 2020. He had stopped in to see me, signed the letter while he was here, and basically Donna Paul has a copy of it as well. So that's his official notice of retiring. And unfortunately, sorry to see him go, and that also then puts us in a position of being another officer down for 2020 until we would get a list and be able, because our list is exhausted. So I guess this would be action to accept Officer Heckler's resignation for his retirement.
Well, I would imagine we would have to take action on this evening to move it along, regretfully. So I would be looking for a motion, commissioners.
I make that motion that we regretfully accept the letter of retirement for longtime Officer Kurt Heckler, effective as of May 8th, 2020.
And with regret, I second that.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye, with regret.
With regret. Any opposed? Motion carries with regret.
Now, Director Hall, what is Kurt's official last day?
It was Friday.
Okay, so the 8th is it.
The 8th is it. Yep, he was in Friday, turned in all his equipment, cleaned out his cubicle. And I know the captain met with him and we met with him, and we had a nice conversation, and he basically vacated, turned in his ID card. So he's officially no longer a member of the department.
There's a hole.
He's kind of a fixture, and we move on.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Sorry to lose him.
Yep. All
right, moving on, Director.
Okay, then item D, the last under public safety, is a discussion and possible action of the board for resolution 2020 R19 that authorizes the township manager to act as the authorized agent for Lower Allen Township for the emergency and disaster relief pursuant to the Robert Stafford Act. So everybody, you know that the governor declared a state of emergency. We have an ongoing state of emergency in place. And based upon, and then the president declared basically a declaration of emergency as well. And there actually are two of them. The first one was the follow-up to, or the second one rather, is the follow-up to the first. And the first was what's called emergency protective measures. And emergency protective measures is the costs associated with the things we needed to prepare for the disaster that was pending and upon us. So the kind of reimbursables will be some of the equipment that we had to order, limited overtime, but there's a whole laundry list of what's called Category B reimbursable expenses. Myself, and I'm not sure who all was on the call, but PEMA actually did a webinar launching this initiative that I sat in on last week with some of the staff. Captain Deven was on it as well. But it requires an agency authorized representative to be put out. There are two forms. One is a DAP1, DAP1, and the other is a DAP2. Those forms, after this resolution, will be signed if the board designates the manager for this. And then we can submit those to PEMA, and we can get in the queue moving forward. I don't expect to see anything done with this for at least a large part of the summer, because the first part of this will be the accumulation of documents and of receipts. And it's much like what we did with a flood, but it's designated towards the pandemic and pandemic reimbursables. So that's what this would do. It would establish the manager as the signatory for the township for that.
I'd like to make the motion authorizing the township manager to act as agent for Lower Allen Township for emergency and disaster relief pursuant to the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act.
Second.
I have a motion on the floor by Vice President Black and a second from Commissioner Shin. Is there any further comments or discussions? Call for the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? This motion carries 4-0. Moving on to Community and Economic Development. And I would imagine Mr. Eby is going to handle this.
Correct. I'll take the lead, and Steve Miner may wish to add some points. The topic is ordinance 2020-01, amending the sign regulations to account for changes in regulations for opinion and election campaign signs. We started discussion back in October of last year, and then on March 9 of this year, staff presented a discussion item at your March 9 meeting. After going through some explanation and review, it was decided that we would revisit it at the next meeting. And then the COVID situation hit, and this is the next meeting at which we're bringing it up. There are two primary issues. One is that there have been some constitutional decrees, particularly from the U.S. Supreme Court, giving some additional protection to campaign signs, election campaign signs. And so the intent section of the ordinance clearly states that, notwithstanding other rules in the sign regulations, it's the intent of the commissioners to abide by the latest case law from the U.S. Supreme Court and Pennsylvania Supreme Court with regard to opinion and election signs. So step one, we're granting a separate, I guess, status to this type of sign because of the constitutional protection of free speech. The second point we're trying to address, that is, we need to tweak the regulations then, which would have been in the past more restrictive on such signs. So what we presented was a Steve's draft ordinance, and then I had indicated that the sign tables need to be tweaked because the tables supplement the text of the code. We discussed at your last meeting on the 9th of March that the signs, election campaign signs, are afforded a right to be in a public right of way. We would not allow anything higher than 3.5 feet in the right of way. And we discussed that at your last meeting. You're sitting in your car, you can see over a low sign. That was the intent of having that rule. And that's our current rule for any sign that's at or near the right of way. The other thing we presented to you is our staff intent, for the sake of presenting this, that a property owner would be limited to one sign on their property for each candidate or each opinion they wish to express. So that's what I think, covered so far. And I think you wanted time to digest all that and go over the table changes. And so I have what I think is a simple explanation for the table changes. Papers at my kitchen table here. Yeah, I apologize. Let me, I must have buried.
Commissioners, late in the day, I asked the manager to send us out. I don't know if you were able to receive that email or not, a copy of these tables.
But here they are, thanks to Aaron.
I love modern technology.
Okay, so I apologize. I misplaced my, what I hope is a brief explanation. You're looking right now at the sign table by zoning district, and this is what it purports to be. In each zoning district, we, by tabular regulation, will tell you what you're allowed to have, right? So all we would do on this page is every time you see permitted uses in district X, Y, or Z, in the right column, number of signs, we would put a new footnote 12. So Aaron, could you flip to the next page? So you'll see we currently have 11 footnotes. We would simply add a 12th footnote, and Steve and I might need to talk and tweak this slightly, but what this would say would be election and campaign opinion signs are permitted in all zoning districts, in addition to signs pertaining to the use of the property or the building. Limit is one sign per opinion or candidate. Signs shall be displayed in accordance with applicable regulations for freestanding or building signs contained in zoning ordinance sign table by sign type. And with opinion election campaign sign regulations contained in the zoning ordinance table for temporary signs, because we're recognizing that mostly these signs are temporary. So that's a simple footnote that would, in one succinct location, take care of what we were trying to accomplish. Then there's one other change that we would make, and Aaron could just scroll to the temporary sign table, which is 2 tables back. Okay, that's the table by type, and the next table is temporary. So, okay, this one's even easier. Okay, you see on the right column, in all zoning districts, we have certain signs that are allowed. There's a type, a square footage allowed, and duration limits. All we do would be add a new column heading on the left of the zoning district saying all. And under it in column 2, for the size, we would refer to the other table, which tells you in whatever district you're limited to 40 square feet or 6 square feet or whatever. And then in the third column, I'm sorry, sign type, second column would simply say election campaign and opinion signs. Third column would simply say refer back to the district regulations for how big the sign can be. Duration limits, at this point we would say none, because these are signs not in the public right of way, but signs on somebody's property. And that would address, that would be simply it as far as the table changes. So I was thinking that Steve and I could reboot on this, since this just came up Friday and today, we could reboot on it. And if we need to tweak the words a little further, we could have this ready to roll. So at that point, I'll let Steve add anything he wishes, and then I'm available for your questions. And if you're inclined to take any action on this as far as triggering the public review, I will remind you the public review is mandated by the municipality's planning code and our zoning code. There is a mandatory public hearing. The planning agencies, Lower Allen and Cumberland County, would have to have the draft document for at least a month prior to you having the public hearing. and I have a suggested date. So with that, I will yield to Steve and to your questions.
And I think John did a great review. I mean, I think the task for staff between John and myself was try to, follow constitutional limits. I think we've done that. And I think our goal is, simplification. And I think John's efforts have been to make these tables clear so that they're understandable. And really the tweaks were minor, but we were looking at, I believe, a change in policy with the board to sort of a broader acceptance of political signs. And that was our goal here. And I hope we've achieved it. But certainly if you have any questions, I will yield back to the board.
Mr. President, I just had one question, and I know John mentioned it, and I want to be careful that I heard it. John, did you say that the election signs would be 3 square feet?
No, I indicated that the height cap anywhere near the right of way would be 3.5 in height. I was just using an example where in different districts, different size signs are allowed. So let's say I'm allowed to have a 40 square foot sign in a commercial district. If I want to put up a public opinion sign saying, I think Lower Allen sign regulations are great, or they're stupid, or I support candidate X, I can have 40 square feet.
Okay.
I'm at my home in a residential district, that size area might be capped to 6 square feet.
Okay.
So we're not addressing it in text, we address it in tabular form.
That's great. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes, Commissioner Kutz.
I have several questions. I request to be recognized for such time as I may consume without objection. So my understanding, you haven't come up with a cap for election signs yet, though, for square footage?
I'm sorry, we do have a cap. It exists now. It just wasn't clearly referenced. So in other words, you had to be intuitive and jump from to go to the table and jump from one table to the other to try to decipher what sign area you're allowed to have. Currently, our sign table does say that in a residential district, signs you're allowed to have for your residential use are capped at 6 square feet. So that's what we've been applying
6 square
for
feet.
quite some time for election and opinion signs.
And is that 6 square feet limit in all districts or just residential?
Just the primary residential districts.
Okay. The other question I had, save me at the moment. So you don't have the language for the footnote yet?
I read it to you. It's something that Steve and I worked on in May. And unfortunately, I didn't check my agenda packet Friday, and I didn't realize this was on the agenda.
Oh, I'm
till
sorry.
tonight.
It's in the email we just received.
It's
Okay.
in the email.
Okay. Okay, very well.
So when Steve said he made some minor tweaks, I didn't know if he meant MINOR or ER, but I think he and I tweaked the language of that, and we might want to look at it before we distribute it and maybe perfect it a little more, but that's essentially what we would have to say.
Yeah, but the 12th footnote isn't in this handout, John, unless I'm.
Okay, the table,
the
signs by zoning district currently contains 11 footnotes. And I think my email message to Tom and Aaron indicates that we would be adding footnote 12 and what the wording of that would be.
I can read you the footnote if you like. It was.
I see it. I see it. Thank you. I got it. I'm in the memo now.
The other thing, Mr. Eby, you mentioned the 1 per candidate or opinion limit. Is that the current regulation or what you're looking to move to?
Hard to tell you what the current regulation is. I can tell you my interpretation is that it's 1 per candidate or opinion, because the table, let me go back to that table, is not very clearly written. If you look at the first table, sign ordinance, signs by zoning district, look at the okay, yeah, there we go. So the starting point would be the top row, permitted in all residential districts, maximum height 6 feet, 6 square feet per face, 1 per use. Okay, what's not clear is, let's say I have a hair salon or a CPA office in my home, and I have a sign for that. That's one use. Am I still allowed to have an election and campaign sign? That's why when Steve and I tweaked the wording, we're saying, in addition to signs permitted for uses of the property owner is allowed to have one election campaign sign and one opinion sign per opinion or candidate.
Well,
Right now, I could say, oh, you have a sign up for your home occupation, so I can't let you have an election campaign sign. We've, as staff, interpreted that it's in addition to, but the table doesn't make that apparent.
well, I don't think we ever settled as a board on limiting it to one per candidate. In my mind, I think, limiting someone on a corner lot from being able to put a sign in each side seems ridiculous to me, and frankly, a violation of their First Amendment right to free speech to limit them to, okay, you can have an opinion, but you can only have an opinion on one part of your yard or property. So to me, I would like to see that language not be included in there at all, or I'm not comfortable advertising this. If we want to discuss an appropriate limit, we can, but I think limiting to one per sign is overly restrictive, and I would argue unconstitutional.
I guess I'll let Steve answer that. We were using the starting point of what's in the current code of one per use. That's our starting point for your discussion. You, as a board of commissioners, obviously can direct staff to put in any number or no number. I think our thought was to start the discussion with the base point we have now.
Well, and then in that case, my thought is, and I haven't seen this, having traversed the entire township and seeing every yard in the township, I did not see a single yard where there were more than 2 signs in a yard. So I don't think omitting a limit from the ordinance is going to lead to a flurry of people putting 10 signs in their yard. So I think putting a limit in right now is an unnecessary step. If we come to a point where, there's an issue, I think we can readdress it. But certainly I don't want to put a limit on free speech at 1 sign per person. I think that's an unreasonable limit on speech. And I'd be in favor of not including any limit on signs, recognizing that we don't have an issue right now with people putting a lot of signs up. That becomes an issue. It's something we can revisit, but right now I'd say no cap, and I'm curious what the other commissioners would have to say.
And my only comment is, Commissioner Kutz, I am fine because, obviously, we are trying to do what's constitutional, and the sign ordinance has evolved since I've been solicitor, from far more restrictive to the current version. You can make it, and obviously the courts are always going to come down on the side of least restrictive. But, when I became solicitor, the problem was foreseen the other way. There were too many, the issue was time and place. There was issues raised about whether they need to be removed, we've limited a lot of that. And so I just don't want to revisit all of that, but I wanted to give you some history, because this version really grew out of the discussion from last November. But I wanted to share that with you because, this is probably the most liberal version that we've had in the township since at least I've been solicitor, and I think probably during Mr. Yetter's time. So, but again, I'll let the other commissioners, express their opinions, because we've obviously evolved, and maybe they want it to be more open or liberal than it is now.
Well, when I looked at the 1 sign, per candidate, opinion, etc., I thought that was just fine. But I have to admit, Commissioner Kutz's comment with respect to the lay of the land, and someone, I used to live in a corner lot, and you want to catch the people coming into 2 streets that your property fronts on, and I guess I just wonder what the purpose of the limitation is. It can't be aesthetics, is that right?
Right, you're not regulating content, but you can always, regulate time and place. And I think the desire has always been, that there's some effort to remove the signs after campaigns are complete. We've really done away with that. We don't have any time restrictions about when they're posted, when they're removed. But the idea, I know over time, is particularly in residential districts, commissioners have voiced concerns that, they were unsightly. And maybe that's the wrong expression. We're talking aesthetics, but that there were too many of them and they stayed there too long. So we're trying to be, protect property values and at the same time, allow for free speech. And it's always a balancing act. And you can always opt for the more open approach, because obviously the courts are going to be favorable of less restriction than more restriction.
Well, see, we're in a situation where, and those who've been around me for a few years now, what I can't stand is "we buy houses." Those signs, and the manager and I have had some vigorous but friendly conversations about those signs. And I was given license to go ahead and start pulling them out of the ground if I want. But that is a full-time job, Tom. I agree with you. And what aggravates me is we can't do anything about them but yank them out and try to throw them away. And that's all we would do if we did that. So I guess I'm back to saying, why worry about people who are pretty courteous about these signs? And that is the official public candidates that run in our townships. I think if we're going to put up with "we buy houses" signs everywhere, I don't know that we should limit the political signs or the opinion.
I don't know that we frankly do put up with the "we buy houses" signs. We pull them as fast as we see them.
Yeah, we can't get ahead of them. That's
I would always suggest, as part of your deliberations on this, that the fact that we don't have a proliferation of multiple signs may be because we already have a limitation.
We already have what, Tom?
We have a limitation already.
I don't think anyone actually looks at a sign ordinance. So I don't really think that, anyone outside of the 16 of us on this call really, or, an attorney looking to get their opponent in trouble really takes time to look at sign ordinances.
I don't know that that it is that they're looking at the ordinance to find out how many signs are allowed to have. I think it's more of after the fact being contacted by somebody at the township to saying you've got too many signs, so take some of them down. I agree. Nobody's going to look up the ordinance, but they'll certainly be told about it if they violated it.
Well, and I can certainly see a lawsuit on the way if you say you've got too many signs, take them down. I mean, what's to say what's too many signs, especially on my own private property? And look, and I think we have two different conversations here. The one is the ordinance for temporary placement of right-of-ways, 220-254. And John and Steve, Mr. Eby and Mr. Solicitor, I appreciate how it's written. I thought the wording was very good on here. So I guess my only quibble is with what goes in the table at this point, because I think the language that you've given to us as a suggestion is spot on and great. So I think my only issue is what's going to go in the table, and that's why I'm saying it's certainly for residential. I don't want to place a limit on one sign on basically saying you have one way to have free speech, and we're limiting your free speech at one sign.
And this is somewhat new territory. Going back historically, the intent of our sign code is to minimize road clutter and to maximize the ability of businesses to identify themselves without causing a lot of road clutter. So that was kind of the theme in maybe having some of the historically more restrictive numbers and sizes of signs. Certainly whatever you as a board come to consensus on with regard to the issue is fine. Steve, I might also add that the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court case that we're basing this upon, I think there were numerous opinions, and the judges are even all over the board on some of the topics. So this might be an ever-changing or evolving matter. And in fact, business owners who object to election and campaign signs in rights of way might file some kind of action to allow their signs in public rights of way. And I understand it's a completely different issue, but this is going to be a moving target, I think, for some time.
Mr. Eby, over the years, I know you and I have had conversation with respect to company vehicles, a van with you know, a step van or whatever good sized truck with a sign of you know, Aces Hardware. Not that is there an Ace Hardware? Let's make it Aces Plumbing on the truck, and it's parked in a shopping area, visibly by the public. I believe that could be construed as a sign. Am I right?
If that truck is moved regularly and used regularly, it's a truck with a sign. If it is predominantly stationary on a property, it's a sign.
Yeah. Okay.
And if I may, would jump in here, I agree with John. I mean, we are using that Town of Gilbert case. That's the most recent U.S. Supreme Court case. And, you know, anyone wants to look at it, there was no majority opinion. There was concurring opinions, and Justice Alito gave a sort of bullet list of items where, you know, basically this would be guidance that municipalities and others can rely upon. But it is a very contentious area, and I guarantee there'll be more litigation in this area. And I've seen the evolution with this board as it's, you know, become sort of more open-minded or more interested. But I just know that there was concerns, you know, over the years, primarily dealing with removal after campaigns.
Mhm.
Well, and I think the current what we have in front of us, Mr. Solicitor, I think is good. And forgive me for not having the exact place highlighted, but I believe you say something in such a reasonable time thereafter as ways when it should come down. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right. And again, because you don't want to necessarily have strict limits, although that, you know, time and place is generally permissible. And I don't like using those weaselly words, but, you know, that's typically, you know, is the courts don't give us very good guidance. You end up with weasel words, as I call them, which with reasonable, et cetera, you know, and no one really knows what that means. And you just hope that people use good sense and take them down.
Well, and these are just to be clear, this is our particular short conversation on public rights of way, which again, I've said I'm good with that public rights of way as you presented it. And then my concern is the table on limiting for residential on what limits, because I think we really just haven't worked out what we want to put in the table. So I think perhaps that warrants further discussion. And I don't know if that's discussion that needs to be had tonight, or if that's we each need to come in and sit down with staff and let you know what our thoughts are and revisit this in 2 weeks or 4 weeks before we move to advertising it.
At this point, I mean, we're clearly not going to make this primary election any changes for that. So, you know, whatever we do, I'm not saying we have a lot of time because anything could happen, but we wouldn't have to necessarily take tonight. But I'll just make a comment. I think like a lot of different issues that we've had in the last couple of years since I've been involved here in the township, we could probably expect this is going to come up again, maybe even in the near future. But I think taking this step and getting a little closer, I am hearing all this discussion tonight. I am in agreement about the limiting of a particular time, particularly on properties that are big, because somebody might want to have one in their up their drive and then over on the other side of the property of the same candidate, and in some cases only have that candidate. And I would just make this comment. A lot of the corners, not just in Lower Allen Township, because of the wind and people aren't regularly taking care of those signs and keeping them upright, that becomes more aesthetically displeasing, I think, in the public side than most signs around on people's properties. And I understand after the election's over, some people are a little as far as getting them down or when the wind blows, not putting them back up quickly. But I think that you know, if we can make a step here and maybe have some more discussion, I would be interested to know, Commissioner, what you're actually looking for in addition to the number of signs.
If I may, from listening to everybody's comments, it seems to me that the ordinance as drafted is okay with the sole exception of the number of signs permitted on residential properties. I
Mr.
mean,
President, the other thing I don't think we've discussed is the size we're okay with. I know 3.5 feet height, but in terms of square footage, is if we're going to limit free speech to 6 square feet on residential properties. So I think that's another discussion we need to have as well.
Now, the 6 square feet, Mr. Eby, is that whether in the right of way or beyond or well into the owner's property off the right of way?
Okay, in a residential zoning district, whether it would be displayed in the public right of way or on the private property, 6 square feet is the current limit, and that's what staff kept in the table.
Gotcha. So I just wanted to clarify that so I knew what I was talking about.
Well, and I think, as I understand, much of this has to do with the public safety with respect to can we see past them? You know, can we see past the sign? We also have the same issue with you know, with shrubs. I mean, there are people with hedges. You know, you pull up and you're almost out in the middle of the street to see it. And so I think we have to have a concern with the size in residential areas, especially because, you know, depending on somebody's front yard, I can take you places where the front yard is a postage stamp and others where it's, you know, landscaped. So I think there needs to be some type of a governor, small g, on the size of the signs in a residential area. Public opinion and free speech notwithstanding.
Commissioner Chen, I would agree that in some cases that you could certainly have some sort of criteria. I think currently is it impeding traffic vision? But I know there are, for example, I believe there's a farm outside of my neighborhood that is zoned residential because right up against the neighborhood now. In theory, I mean, that farm is 40 acres at least. And they, in theory, under this zone, under this idea, you'd be limiting them to want a sign of 6 square feet. And they could, you know, there's barns out in, you know, off the turnpike, and the barns post and their whole barn is painted with one big candidate on it. And so my only concern is that the one size fits all approach with a rigid limit lumps in people whose properties may not conform to standard, you know, in my mind, you know, you have a big farm like this, they've got more room. So to have a 4x8 sign is more reasonable. And while I understand what you're saying, Commissioner Chin, and in your neighborhood, I get some of those front yards are you're right, and same in mine, is that you certainly don't want them to be huge. And I don't know if there's a middle ground that we can come up with that kind of balances those two competing concerns.
Well, over the past few elections, and I think I know where it started, but we'll let that alone. The huge signs that are built on 2x4s, you know, with cement blocks holding them from blowing away. On Wesley Drive, for instance, there was at least one along there that it's incredible. It's, you know, it's huge, and I don't know how people can see around them when they try to pull in and out of their driveway. You know, I mean, the farm that you're talking about, I understand they could put a neon sign up. You know, that'd be no problem at all. But I don't know. This unless there were going to be unless we were going to name someone like the zoning officer or somebody who could look at criteria that, you know, could make a, you know, an example of, or be able to make a decision on. This is not an easy. This is about as difficult as coming up with something other than property taxes for the legislature. You know, this is not an easy situation.
Frankly, Commissioner, I think you might have hit the nail on the head there, in that I think the zoning officer could be an appropriate person to determine whether or not a sign in a residential area is too big that it impedes vision and needs to be moved. And frankly, I would favor that, favor empowering the zoning officer with that authority, which would then, you'd need a right of appeal to not offend notions of due process. So maybe perhaps the zoning officer could act to evaluate whether a yard sign impedes the public vision or whatever criteria we set forth. And then after that, a person can appeal to likely I don't know if the zoning hearing board would be the proper body for that, but that person could appeal that decision. And then you have a process there that doesn't have a rigid number per se, but you do have a way that if someone has just an absurdly large sign that's in the way for traffic, that the zoning officer would be empowered to take care of that.
Well, for future boards who were not involved in this conversation, whatever we come up with, if we were to go in that direction, the board would need to stand behind the zoning officer to enforce, the spirit of what we're talking about here, because we don't want that person's legs cut out from under them the first time they make a political candidate not happy, and then politics get involved. That would be my only concern.
I feel like we're making a kind of a full circle here. Part of the point is to try to get something a little bit more crystal clear to take out of the zoning.
Yeah, you're right.
Except I agree. Yeah, I agree with the point Commissioner Kutz is making. If it's off of the right of way and it's not hindering vision, but I'm not sure we're going to come up with anything perfect. Would it be wise? I mean, what we'd be doing today, I'm not sure what we've come up with actually, but what we would be doing is trying to get this advertised so that there could be a comment period. The public could weigh in even more and have more of a public discussion on this. I would imagine we'd have to have a public hearing.
Correct. And as John said, it's up to you, board, whether you want to do more drafting, but there is a public hearing required. The earliest, I think John said, would be with advertising in the planning commission. I believe it's your second meeting in June. And,
right.
We can either proceed in that fashion or, move it back to, later meeting.
And my point is that even after a public meeting, we can go back and tweak it.
That's the whole purpose of the public meeting, public hearing, so that we get input from, the folks who have something to say about this. And I think we can move off the dime by advertising what we have and then hearing what the public would have to say. And if we have to tweak it, we can, and then have another hearing. That's been done before.
Are we unanimous at this point, at least for the commissioners that are here, about the number of signs per, I guess it's called use in this case, in layman's terms, like if you're supporting candidate A, you could have more than one sign that we would want to have added in there. Is that something we're all at least in agreement on that issue?
Well, could we identify a corner lot, for instance, which takes into consideration perhaps Commissioner Kutz's comments, and other than that, one sign, in the yard. But if you have a corner lot, then you could have two, that kind of thing.
My concern with limiting to corner lots, I think you're picking and choosing a little bit, and that doesn't take into account people with longer yards that, think of it, if two houses are close together, you have next door neighbors, signs are 25 feet apart. But if you have someone with a large, this farm on Slate Hill Road, for example, if they wanted to put up signs, I hate to limit them to one per use. I just think that's limiting free speech to one sign, I think is a slippery slope that opens us up to potential litigation.
What do other municipalities do, John? Do we know?
It's all over the board. Some still have antiquated ordinances that require a permit or require registration of election and campaign signs, but most, I think, have come into the more recent realm of case law, Supreme Court case law. I could certainly do some research and reporting and do some comparables for you, but it sounds like you as a board collectively need to come up with a consensus on whether you want this to go forward the way it's written, you want staff to rewrite it, or you want to have a rewrite in process as a result of the public review.
Let's do it this way. Everybody has a copy of the ordinance. Everybody has a copy of the table, correct?
Mhm.
Why don't we take some time, make your notes on your copy. We will compile the notes so that everybody can see what everybody else thinks. Resubmit that to the board, and then possibly if you can come to close to a consensus, then we can advertise it to get public opinion.
Okay.
Great.
I think that's a great suggestion.
I think we're spitting in the wind right now by
Yes.
anything.
So our wheels are spinning. You're right.
Yes, yes. So I think it's a wise idea for us to do that. So
Does everybody have a copy of the ordinance
yes,
in the packet? And everybody has a copy of the table.
All I have is just the language for that we've been talking about tonight. Is that what you're talking about? Yes.
You have the email with the language.
Yep.
You have a copy of the table that came as an attachment to the email.
Yep. Yep.
And you have the ordinance. So from those three things, you can mark those up, make your notes, what you like, what you don't like. Send those back to us. We'll give you, a week or two, however long you need to get it back to us. We'll compile the commissioner's comments that we can put it in some kind of order that looks like it might have a chance of a majority vote.
Yeah, we don't have a full board tonight, so that would be helpful.
yes. And Tom, will you make sure Commissioner Holtzman knows what we're doing?
Absolutely.
Okay. I think if everybody's good, then we'll just move on there. I mean, why don't we give ourselves a deadline of the next meeting to discuss this again? And in the interim, maybe give ourselves about a week to 10 days and then have it on the agenda for the next meeting.
Yeah, Mr. President,
Commissioner Kutz?
it would be possible just to get it to the manager by the time the package will go out the Friday before. I'd like time to review the case law and speak with counsel before compiling comments.
Well, then we won't be ready for next meeting.
I'm saying our comments can come out with the packets.
So you're suggesting a week, I'm saying about a week to 10 days here. That's about right.
Give us a date that you want things into the manager, Mr. President.
You betcha. Let me get my calendar up.
That's what I was gonna say. I don't have to get a calendar.
Well, the next meeting is on the 25th. Gonna have to allow staff a couple of days to compile these things, so.
Mhm.
I would say by next Wednesday, the 20th. Enough time, Mr. Manager?
I'm going to say yes.
That gives staff Thursday, well, that just gives staff Thursday and Friday. I'm going to be more inclined to say we should do this have it no later by the end of the day on Monday, the 18th. That gives us plenty of time. That's an entire week.
1 week from today.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, and it gives staff that week to put it together and get it into our packets.
That's fine. I just don't see the rush to get this by the next meeting. I mean, there's, extensive material to review. There's, case law and opinions by different justices. I think it'd help for me to be able to understand where the constitutional limitations are. Is there any rush why we have to have this by the next meeting? Or
No, not at all. But I think that if we can take a step at that meeting, so if we can get some of our comments back, I think I understand what you're saying, though, Commissioner. You're saying that you need time to even figure out what your comments are going to be.
Right, and of course I've made my preliminary comments here tonight, but now that I have the table, in front of me and whatever we just got right before the meeting, now that I have that, I want to digest that a little bit. and take a look. I can certainly try and get it in by next Wednesday, but I don't want to be held to that deadline if you know, I'm still reviewing material. Because I don't know what the body of case opened. I just opened Lexis a few minutes ago to see.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't we do for next Monday? And if it turns out that any of us need some extra time, then we'll have to put it on an additional period.
We'll just leave it as, get it back to me as soon as you can, and then we'll put it on. Shoot for a week from today.
Got it. And our meeting is 2 weeks from today, right? 25th.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And if we don't have all the information in, we'll just put it out another period.
See.
I just want to add, I believe 2 weeks from today is Memorial Day, is it not? So the meeting would be Tuesday, the 26th.
Tuesday, the 26th.
Is that correct, Mr. Manager?
Without checking the calendar, I
May
would,
25th is a Monday.
Right. I had it in mind as the first note for a change in date on the website says the 26th because the 25th is Memorial Day.
All right. Next meeting is the 26th. I'm sure you're right.
Okay. I think we're all clear on what we're going to do here, at least in the interim. We'll move on to number 11. Mr. Manager, lead us through Penn Waste contract.
okay, let me pull up a couple of things here. Okay, we have our refuse and recycling contract is expiring at the end of 2020. Did start a conversation with our current hauler, Penn Waste. When we first entered into a contract with them back in, oh geez, I don't even remember the year. We had built in 2 3-year extensions into the contract. We are currently in our first 3-year extension, which, as I said, expires at the end of this year. We can extend with them for another 3-year period if we like. So had a conversation with them to see what their rates would be. What they gave us was very good, actually. It's very impressive. What I put up here on the screen is most of the other municipalities here that are on this table have already renewed within the past 6 months or so. And some of them got really astronomical rates and increases. You can see there, Hamden Township, I guess, led the pack with 81% increase.
Wow.
And then Upper Allen, Dickinson, and Middlesex right there in the kind of in the 40s. What they have offered us, and there's actually 2 proposals there, will put us at in the first year either a 22% increase with a 35% increase over 3 years, or the other proposal, which will be a flat fee for each of the next 3 years, would be a 33% increase at one time, but then it would stay at the same rate. Again, nobody wants an increase. 33% is a lot, 35% is a lot. But it is considerably less than what the other municipalities are looking at.
What is our current rate, Tom?
Let me pull that up for you.
6189.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
189.
Mr. Manager, Mr. Finance Director Grove, do you guys, either of you happen to know offhand the 33% or the 35%? Which one is a net positive for, or which one is the better, works out better for the taxpayers?
Well, the 33% is, if you look at over a 3-year period, the net increase over 3 years is 33%. If you go with the stepped amount, then it's going to be a 35% increase over 3 years. But the first year will not be quite as large of an increase.
Right. I mean, in the long term, if you look at over the next 3 years, I didn't add it up. I apologize. Which do the taxpayers end up paying less for?
The stepped increase is the lower amount. Now you're ending up with a higher monthly rate there, but if you're looking at those 3 years, the stepped amount would be the least dollars coming from the ratepayers.
That's proposal one? Is that proposal one?
Yes.
Yeah, proposal one is the stepped amount.
Yeah. Okay. The only concern I had about that was nobody wants to see an increase again, I mean, it's kind of like bite the bullet and, I don't know, go from where we are to.
Well, I'm going to ask Mr. Grove, based on where you're saying that they're going to pay less with the step increase, because that's a 35% increase over 3 years. Whereas,
Yeah, you add up, I just added up the rates for the 3 years,
okay,
and it is less than the rates at the flat rate. I mean, just add up the 3 rates, and you come ahead a little bit with the stepped increases.
So Rick, you're
Coming ahead meaning you pay less.
saying do 63 the first year and then it goes to a 35% is for the next 3. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the first option goes to 72.96, then to 76.17, then to 79.35.
What am I saying? 60?
And the second option is at 78.33 all 3 years.
I'm sorry.
so what you're looking at right now is the graduated amount. I'm saying the first highlighted column, the rates would go from 1652. Okay, if you want to look at the total amount, but
Yeah, look at the totals.
it's the trash amount, but we also add the yard waste fee in there too. Total amount would go from 2063 to 2433 in the first year. Second year would go to 2539, and the third year 2645. So you have 3 years worth of increases. On the flat rate proposal, there we go. Goes from 2063 to 2611, but then it stays at 2611 for each of the next 3 years. So there is no increase.
So you're adding the top column and the bottom column, 78 and 26. Is that what you're saying?
Now this is quarterly. The bottom set of numbers is the quarterly bill. The top set is the monthly rate.
All right.
So that's the actual rate they're quoting us. I converted it to quarterly because that's how our bill goes out.
No, that's good. And you're saying today, I have to find it now, it's 61.89. So we would be going from 61.89 to $78.
$78.33.
Wow.
That's on the flat rate amount. On the graduated amount, you'd be going to 72.96.
Tom, these increases are a result of, I would imagine, the recycling issue, correct, or part of it?
Yeah, partly.
So what would be the harm, I guess, or what would be the costs to forbid on it? And or do you have like some information or that?
I don't have any information for you. All I can tell you is that is your other option, is to not renew this contract and just go out to bid and hope for the best.
Have any municipalities that you know of recently tried that and been successful?
No. And I mean,
you don't know, or they're not successful.
Well, all I can tell you is the ones that you're looking at on that sheet. That those are the rates that they've been getting. 45% average increase. I don't know if you consider that successful or not. To be perfectly frank, I did not expect to get renewal rates anywhere near this low. I would have bet you a paycheck that we would end up going out to bid anyway, simply because I thought that was shocked to see how low they were.
Right.
Kind of made me say, well, I guess we need to take a serious look at this, but going out to bid is always an option. We can do that. And we can, we can cross the other thing we can do when we go out to bid, which we're not doing here, because what you're looking at right here is a renewal of service as it is today. I talked to them about changing some of the options. They weren't really interested in changing anything. They wanted to keep it as is. But we have the option of changing the level of the service. For example, we can reduce the number of bags. Right now, our weekly bag limit it's unlimited. We can limit that and probably get a little of a price break. We can limit our yard waste to once every 2 weeks instead of every week. Most municipalities, in fact, are doing it once every 2 weeks. We could probably get a price break on that.
That's
So
confusing.
there's things we can do to try to lower the quotes, but ultimately, we're going to have to take low bid, whatever that is. If it happens to be a different company, then we're going to go through the logistics of swapping out carts.
Tom, you talk about number of bags. We use the containers, don't we? I mean,
We do, but they're not mandatory. A lot of people still put out individual containers, and we do not have a limit on individual.
I asked about going out for bid just to make sure that we were thinking about it. But my thought was that the reason this is so low is because they wouldn't have a transition period or cost. And I would imagine that's probably why some of these municipalities are getting higher prices, because there's probably a cost to get people new bins and such. So
yeah.
Yeah, I don't want to roll those dice. I don't have any problem with the service that Penn Waste is giving us. And I know if we reduce the number of containers that go on the street, we're going to get lots of complaints. And if we can do 33 or 35% increase over 3 years, as compared to what we're seeing those townships that went out to bid, that's not a good idea.
I think you're right, Ed.
Yeah, and I concur with both Vice President Black and Commissioner Shin.
And I'll tell you, it's some experience I've had in the last several years when change in a community that we had associated with in another county. The transition was not pleasant, and it rolled on for at least a month. I mean, it was ugly for a while. So sometimes it doesn't pay to give up service if you think the service is decent. And the only complaints I've ever heard have been recently about the yard waste, and we know why that is. We've been discussing that. So.
Yeah, and when I told people the reason, they said, "Oh, okay, it's understandable." So people like to know sometimes like why,
So commissioners, I think that our question is going to be, which plan do we want to save folks money in the short term or in the long term?
I guess the first question, when I think I know the answer to it, is you are interested in extending the contract for years of Penn Waste.
Seems that way.
Yes.
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 Then your question, President Malone, is which of the two options? And I know that this doesn't make any difference, but Penn Waste would prefer to do the graduated one. As our finance director told us, that is actually less in real dollar terms than the level option. Even though I'm gonna have to play with some numbers here to find out how this works out, but even though the level option is less of an increase over the length of the contract.
Tom, could we publish what the next what the rates are going to be over the life of the contract? So people, because I live in a community where there are some elderly people, and they're getting whacked in the head every which way they turn, by increases all over the charts. If they know and can plan with that, is that possible?
Well, we would do a newsletter article anyway. But for the folks that don't read the newsletter, I'm not sure how we would get the information out there.
Well, I don't think that's not my point is this. It's up to them to have a way to see it. I mean, if they're not going to go online for anything, then, they're going to be a little troubled. But I think people would like to know, how do I plan over the next, 4 years or 3 years? 4
years.
3 years.
3.
I just think it's prudent in these days
Could we, over the last quarter or two that they received bills, modify the insert with a highlight? When they open it up, they really see that the increase is coming and that's what it's going to be. Is that possible, or is that require a major overhaul to the mailings?
Well,
Stuff them.
I'll answer two ways. One, Rick and Grove can answer that based on our current system. But keep in mind, we're also looking for a new system. So I don't know how the new system will handle it. I assume because we're trying to get bigger and better, it would handle it with no problem, but.
Don't buy it if it can't do something as simple as that, Tom.
Yep, I hear you. I agree.
And I think we owe a duty to our residents to inform them when rates are increasing for any of their fees or taxes. And we do have a large, substantial portion of our population who don't access the internet or don't access the township's features on the internet. So I would be in favor of mailing something, and if you tuck it in with the next time it goes out, you're saving on postage, so you're not actually mailing postage to everyone. But I would be in favor of sending a notice along to each household that the rates are increasing, and if they can also note that it's because Penn Waste is increasing them and not because we are, that would be great.
You're talking of spending several $1,000s because it's the bill itself is a self-sealed mailer. You can't include a letter in it. It has some space to include a note, which we often do. But I think what you're looking at would be a separate mailing, where we would be buying the paper, the envelopes, the postage, the whole thing.
No, I'm okay with a note, just as long as it's somewhere on with the bill that they get. If you're saying, Mr. Grove, that there's room for a note there, that would suffice, just as long as when they see it, they will see note rates will be increasing with your next bill.
I was gonna say, Rick, we could utilize the note lines on the bill depending on how many characters it allows us and what kind of information we're going to be trying to convey. If it's a simple notice, big letters notice, rates will increase to X dollars next quarter. That'll fit on the note line. That's probably all we need.
Yes, we can certainly do that.
Yeah, and that's sufficient for my concern. I just want to make sure we get it to everyone, for those people that might not access the township's resources online.
Okay, well, also in your packet then was a proposal from Penn Waste. And if the board would like to make a motion tonight to authorize me to accept the proposal.
Which one are we accepting?
These rates will not go into effect until January of 2021.
Mr. Manager, I know you said Penn Waste has a preference of the graduated rate. Do you or the finance director have a preference?
I do not. I believe if we look at the nets, well, I don't call them savings, but the lowest possible amount to pay by the residents, I believe Rick has said that the graduated rate would be better.
And I would be fine with that as long as we can give the folks a heads up so they can plan.
It's kind of 6 of one, half dozen the other. The graduated amount gives them a lower first year increase and a lower dollar increase over 3 years. However, there's something to be said for having a given rate for 3 years that doesn't go up.
How much difference is it, Rick?
Like $7, I think, per.
I mean, over 3 years.
I think it's $7 per household per quarter.
Per quarter. So it's $28
times 3.
$28 a year per household savings.
Times 4. $28.
3 years, right? 28. times 4 times 3. Well, $28 is $28. I think I could go with the gradual. As long as we really push information.
Get as much information out there as we can about this renewal and what it's going to mean to rates. I hate for it to go up every year, but at the same time, I don't want somebody to get a 33% increase all in 1 year.
That was,
Well, and I think people, if they have that time to plan, it's better.
Yep.
To save money in the long run.
yes.
Yeah, and as I think the manager's on the right track, as long as people know, hey, this is going to be going up each of the next 3 years, that they can be prepared, and perhaps we tell them also this is the cheaper option of the two. And I wouldn't even be opposed to, I don't know if this memo can be shared publicly, but if people are interested in, well, hey, why are my rates going up? I think we could direct them to here's what Penn Waste has told us. And I think this memo,
Which
maybe
memo?
not.
Which memo are we talking about?
I'm sorry, I guess the letter from Penn Waste, it's 11A extension proposal, Penn Waste.
I probably would not share that without their authorization.
Well, honestly, it aggravated me to read it, to be honest with you, Thomas. It's
Yeah,
not-
well, and that's my thought
They
is,
happen to drive it.
Well, in the world scheme, the residents are going to get an increase because it's my understanding that these vendors can't get rid of the recyclables.
Right.
Yeah, I get that. But the turnover and CDL driver shortage, that sounds like a management problem.
Well, yeah, I agree with you, Rick. Put that wording in, but I would put in the world scene, as I call it.
Yeah.
They're having trouble getting rid of the recyclables. And I would even go so far as to put in the spread of increases that other municipalities have seen. I
Mhm.
would not put proper names attached. I wouldn't
Right.
call out Hampton, Upper Allen, Dickinson, and Middlesex, but I would put in the rate increases.
Yeah.
And then I tell our residents that, our existing vendor has extended to us, whether we select 33% over 3 years or 35% over 3 years, we consider that a bargain, and that's why we made the decision.
That's a good point.
that's exactly what I was trying to say, just not as well as Vice President Black did. So Vice President Black, I appreciate it. That's my sentiments exactly.
Good. So which one?
And I think
graduated?
I think that's all right.
Going with the graduated then?
That's what I'm inclined to do.
Mm-hmm.
To take a vote on this, Mr. Manager, or not?
Yes, I would like for you to take a vote
Okay.
in that direction, then to accept their proposal for graduated increase.
So moved.
Second,
So I have a motion by Commissioner Shin and a second by Vice President Black on the going with the graduated increase for the refuse and yard waste. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. And I'll just reiterate, Mr. Manager, if we can do everything possible to make sure that when people go to the website, they see it clearly, maybe for a while, starting in the next couple of months.
It'll be on the township website, and we will also do a newsletter article when that comes out.
Mm.
The newsletter also sits on the website for a while.
There's no
Okay.
point telling the press, right? Because they never cover us. Is that right?
I sent them, they're so frustrating. I sent them a press release a week or so ago, letting them know that the Gettysburg Road relocation project was starting, which is kind of a big deal. And
Yeah.
got no coverage whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
It's not political or pandemical.
in some ways, it's good to fly under the radar, but
That's
we're
right.
trying- Anyway,
All right, well, moving on, Mr. Manager, you have another issue regarding CAPCOG for discussion?
in your packet was a thing from COG, which it's suggested legislation looking for a sponsor right now. I had what it would do, and I had a conversation with Mr. Grove about this to get his opinion on what this would be, what this would mean for municipal finance. Essentially, what it does is it creates a new section of debt, a new definition of debt under the Local Government Unit Debt Act. That would be that would allow municipalities to borrow funds, operating funds, generally frowned upon.
Yeah.
Borrow operating funds because of COVID-19 related expenses. But it wouldn't limit it to that instance. It would also go on into the future for similar type of emergencies. And I'll go ahead and let Rick give his, he explained it to me pretty eloquently, so I'll let him tell you about it. It's just kind of a mixed bag as far as what it means. Rick?
Okay, you'll understand the difference between borrowing for capital, for fixed assets, like police cars and buildings, that type of thing. This would allow borrowing for working capital. In other words, we're short on cash for operating, like Tom said. Currently, the only way we have to do that is to pay the minimum balance on a credit card, which is not at all a very good way to go. So for a municipality that thinks conservatively and is well run, which I would dare say we clearly fall in that category, I think this would be a nice safety net to have. And it would only be used if absolutely necessary, something unexpected happened, which happens. You have this to fall back on. My worry would be all the other municipalities that theoretically you could borrow for up to 10 years, not pay any of the principal for 2 of those 10, use it to balance the budget, and then pass on the cost to future boards. I mean, that'd be the worst case scenario. It does not count against your legal debt limit, which is also a nice feature. As far as what I could tell, this would qualify for tax exempt borrowing. It's also a very nice feature. It has a mandated prepayment ability where the township would have the right to prepay it at any time without a penalty. It is not approved by DCED, which is another thing that makes it a little bit unusual. Most debt, I mean, our capital leases aren't, but most debt extending out 10 years, like that are bonds or notes, are approved by DCED. So, I mean, it gives us a lot of flexibility that would be very useful to have if we needed it. On the other hand, I could see this leading to accelerated financial ruin for some municipalities.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind to me is I mean, just doesn't happen under our current setup here in Lower Allen, but I mean, that you become complacent as an organization later on, does this help promote that complacency? And wow, I'm kind of surprised. You mentioned CDEC.
It was so.
Not approving it. What does that mean exactly?
No, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rick. That question was for you. DCED.
Yeah, the state approves our bond issues now. When we go to if we want to issue a bond, it goes to the state for approval.
Yeah.
And the state either approves it or rejects it. In this case, it would not go. And the debt limit on this is pretty high for us. It would be almost $9 million we could borrow for working capital purposes.
But it has to relate to COVID-19, right, Rick?
That's not how I interpreted it. It has that name. I think that's the justification or how it comes into creation, the reasoning. But this seems to have no expiration. It says under E, in any given year, meaning that is my understanding that you could float this money at any future time.
Well, we're not affected by other municipalities, are we, Rick? This.
No.
Okay, all right.
Well, I have a two-part question, Rick. Do we think we're going to need this as a result of COVID-19?
No, not as a result of COVID, no.
Okay, but should we support this in the event some of these municipalities open up and we get a growth of the virus and we're affected by it also? Shouldn't we support this program?
I have no problem supporting it. I mean, I have no doubt we will use it sensibly. You know, as long as you use it sensibly, which would be a very rare case in our, you know, for us, it's a wonderful tool to have.
But see, that prompted that statement is the second time you've made it now, Rick. And that's what prompted my question about what is, I don't mean to sound callous, but what's our problem with however other people handle it? You know, so what?
Well, they're, I believe, asking, HOG is asking for our feedback on it, I believe, and that, you know, is a possible issue for feedback.
I agree. I mean, we see it as something that would really be a nice safety net for us. So we would support such a thing, and we think it, you know, that we'd be able to handle it properly. Of course, we have no way of predicting future Lower Island boards either. So
right,
I don't know.
I was actually, when I first read it, I was a little surprised because the whole point behind the Government Unit Debt Act was to sort of manage municipalities borrowing, get themselves in trouble. And now all of a sudden they're saying, well, because of COVID-19, which is an unusual situation, we have not had the economy affected like this, possibly ever. But so it is an unusual circumstance, but to create a category of borrowing that doesn't require any oversight is a little scary. You know, again, as Rick said, there's a lot of very well managed and financed municipalities out there that would be fine with this. But there are a lot that aren't, and then of course they're not our concern. I agree.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking.
But you know, we see what happens when municipalities gotten into trouble with pensions and poor pension investments. And years ago, it was the help me out, Rick. It was the Orange County thing.
Oh yeah,
I forget what
it was an investment pool that they overextended and it failed.
And this is, so it can have a ripple effect on other municipalities, whether through increased fees and rates or just more government oversight. But yeah, a member, and they didn't indicate who, but a member of the capital area COG drafted this up, and now they're looking for somebody to sponsor it, and they sent it out to the municipalities just to get our comments on it. So I'm bringing it up to the board to get your comments. I can certainly get Mr. Grove's comments back to them. Be valuable.
You know, in our personal finances, when you look at credit score ratings, a personal FICO score actually goes down if you refuse credit limit increases on your credit cards. And I'm just wondering to somehow setting the stage for down the road for the government perhaps to step in and say if you don't borrow money from banks and stuff that they might look upon them and just make it easy now for them to do it. But I mean, obviously for us, it seems we're very disciplined in Lower Allen. From what I'm to understand from what Director Grove's saying is that the tool is actually remarkable to have at our disposal. I would imagine we wouldn't ever really need it, at least in the foreseeable future.
Mr. President, may I just make two comments very quickly?
Mr. Solicitor, yep.
Yeah, just want to make sure you clarified. I mean, you know, sub K says that you can't have COVID debt after December 31st, 2021. So it's only this year and next year. And my only comment I made to the manager is I just don't see, anyone buying bonds in Pennsylvania that aren't approved by DCED. I just don't see that this is practical. And the DCED process doesn't take that long. But I mean, if, what I'm saying, it would appear that if you're not going to go through that process, you're going to pay higher interest rates, because I don't know. I mean, that's sort of what makes the public debt manageable and why people buy it, because they know DCED has reviewed it. So I don't know. I just found it puzzling that was sort of the approach, because it seems to me that if they wanted to do this, the DCED review would be good, whether it's operating funds or capital expenditures. But
I see.
That's my comment.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. I mean, our ability to issue bonds right now isn't hindered at all. Is that correct?
No, and I mean, you've and as Mr. Grove said, you have very high credit rating. Your bonds are desirable. So I mean, it's that's a factor of good government, but you also always have the stamp of approval of DCED when you go out for a bond issue.
Right. And and under this, it sounds like that, if I'm understanding that correctly, DCED is not approving this.
Right, you file with it, but there's no approval.
Got it. Any other comments, commissioners?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. How are we going to respond? I heard some good things being said, but they won't be coming from me. I'm not the expert.
Well, that's what I'm wondering, is if we even need to do anything. I mean, do we feel some sort of obligation to respond to CapCog?
Not as far as I'm concerned.
Well, for something like this, I think we have some expertise on our staff, which could help them out. And if it's okay with the board, I'll simply transmit the thoughts that Mr. Grove had put on in an email memo to me, as well as what our solicitor had to say. And it's not, I'm not saying we're for or against it, just some things for them to think about. If you agree with what's been presented to you tonight, that's what I'll transmit to them.
So Tom, this will have to then, COG is recommending this to the legislature. Is that what we're saying?
I think COG's in favor of it. They're shopping for a sponsor right now.
Okay, I got it. I agree with what you said.
I agree also.
Yep, I'm in favor of taking that approach. So.
Okay. Got marching orders then. That's what we'll do.
Good.
And I have nothing further.
Okay. We'll move on to commissioner reports. Before we do, Mr. Solicitor or Mr. Manager, are we doing anything in executive session to the best of your knowledge?
Not for me.
No.
Nope. Okay. Well, we'll move on to commissioner reports. I'll start with Captain Deven. Anything?
No, I have nothing.
Mr. Eby?
Gone.
Okay, just want to thank you for the Building Safety Month resolution. Unfortunately, we couldn't give you a presentation for public safety aspects of what we do this year. And unfortunately, our public events and press releases at the Capitol were canceled, but thank you for the resolution.
Yep. Mr. Eby, I'm just curious, if you don't mind, any update on what activities the Yellow Breaches Watershed Association will be doing this year at all?
Well, we're not actively soliciting volunteers, but we have a bunch of trees and shrubs to plant. But we're not really outreaching outside our group to do any planting. And then we're still in limbo on whether we're doing the summer on the creek cleanup. We also had planned some outreach events, public gatherings at, let's say, a restaurant or something, where we would have a board meeting and then have a meet and greet and maybe promote the association. Those have been canceled. So we're kind of in a limbo mode right now.
Okay. Well, if I can help at all, Vicki and I are certainly getting ready to come and help on the creek, or she had mentioned to me about helping to plant some of those, I guess, the buffers. So,
Okay, we will get you information.
Tina,
Nothing, thank you.
nothing. Thank you for your work tonight. Ms. Trone,
Nope, I don't have anything tonight, and nobody joined on our meeting, so we don't have any comments from the public either.
okay. Director Hall.
Couple of quick things, Commissioner. One of the benefits of EMS in-house is the practice with the police department has been, if we arrest, now we haven't been doing this lately because of COVID, but if you arrest a DUI, that DUI has to go down and have blood drawn essentially at one of the hospitals, which increases the time. It's a safety issue. The recent protocols were changed to allow for paramedics to do those blood draws. So I sent a letter down to DA Ebert asking for his blessing and approval of that practice. And he got back to me on the phone a couple of days ago and said he approves. So Captain Crone and Captain Deven are working out procedures to make that happen. So in the event that there's a DUI arrest, they will bring, police will bring that individual back to the station down in what is the interview area. And we have a process where they, using the same collection kit that would be used and turned in at the prison, our medics will, if available, will come over and actually do those blood draws for the legal DUI. And like I said, the DA's blessed that. We also, I talked to DA about this, and we also will be able to have the time that paramedic invested in pulling that blood compensated. Now it'll take months for that to happen because there has to be a disposition of the case. We'll be able to submit that. So I think that's a great thing, and I think the two captains have worked together and will continue to work together to implement that. So that was the first point. The other is I want to just, and Tony's aware of this also, Captain Deven's aware of this, kudos to EMS for a cardiac arrest save. It was a witnessed arrest and counter shock, brought that patient back, and that patient was awake, alert, and oriented, being transported to the hospital. That just occurred back on May the 9th. So
Fantastic. You're here.
Outstanding effort by that crew. And then finally, this is Police Week. So on May the 13th, Wednesday, this coming Wednesday in the evening, the National Law Enforcement Memorial Museum plans to, they can't do their usual march because of the COVID situation. So they're planning a virtual candlelight vigil. Anybody wants to tune into that, you can basically go to the National Law Enforcement Memorial Museum website. They'll be reading the names of all the law enforcement officers killed in the line of duty over the past year. So somber event, but I think the ceremony is well deserved, and it's usually is well attended down in DC itself. So this is the first time they're going to be doing the virtual piece, so it should be interesting. But
And could you put out a reminder in maybe a website that we could?
Sure,
that?
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
That's all for me. Thank you.
Is that it, Director? Director, thanks again for all the updates. Information has certainly been helpful to understand how things are progressing. Captain Crone.
On the heels of Director Hall, I'd like to just publicly acknowledge and thank our police officers for the job they do day in, day out. The unseen times that they put it all on the line for the citizens of Lower Allen Township. And it's much appreciated. And I just want to put that out there for them.
And again, sorry to see that you're losing Officer Heckler. Mr. Flint?
I have nothing further. Thank you.
Captain Deven, you moved. Let's see here. Solicitor Minor?
Nothing further. Thank you, Mr. President.
Director Grove?
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Okay. Commissioner Shin?
Yes, thank you. I would I thought this was a great meeting, and I just want to thank the board for the very spirited, very positive comments in our discussions. Felt we've overcome the media issue, the medium issue, and I'm just very proud of what we've done tonight and so far during this pandemic. So, Mr. President, my thanks to you and to the board and to the staff for everything that's been going on. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kutz.
Thank you, Mr. President. Briefly, just actually echo Commissioner Shin's comments. I thought it was very productive. One of the most productive we've had in terms of positive and constructive conversation. And I look forward to that kind of chemistry and continuity moving forward. And I just want to add, especially for Captain Deven, the memo on the striker stretchers was phenomenal. And I just, for me, especially for the new commissioner, it helps me to get all the data I can to make a comprehensive decision. And, there's times where operating on very limited information, or we'll get something at 5:30 and be asked to talk about it at 7. And just the fact that you had such an extensive, answered as many questions as you could for us, and made us, when we were probably starting the meeting, uncomfortable spending such a large sum of money. And the memo and your and Director Hall and yours included, just your thoroughness and attention to detail, I think speaks volumes, and we certainly appreciate that, especially when we're spending those sums of money. We want to make sure we're making the right decisions, and you are really doing the taxpayers a service by putting the time and effort in. So I just want to say I really appreciate that, and that's all I have, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice President Black.
Well, as the commissioner's liaison to public safety, there were a lot of good things discussed at our last Friday's session, but Captain Deven, you're still in there?
Yes.
Tony is?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Yeah, Tony. Make sure that I have this right, Tony, please. Of the nursing homes that we have in our township, with probably 3,000 prisoners at SCIC, I think I'm close there, aren't I?
Yep, you're close.
And with Mallard Run high-rise assisted living facility, as of last Friday, they had no cases of COVID-19. Is that correct?
That's correct. We're in touch with the nursing homes, touch base with both of them today as well. And as of today, Bethany still has no COVID patients, and neither does the Woods. Everybody is moving along good. I have not heard back from SCIC. I did check on the report that was in the Cumberland County's situation report that we discussed on Friday, and SCIC has had no prisoner cases as well at this point. So everybody's doing well, and that's been the difference in pretty much Lower Allen Township. Our nursing homes have not gotten hit yet.
Mhm.
And I think that's miraculous, because I just lost a college classmate to COVID-19 in Connecticut. Tony also reported, Tony, I don't mean to make your report for you, but Tony did report that we have an adequate supply of personal protection equipment. We were going to do a search for some hand sanitizer. They're working on a program. We have determined that we have some fire department members that hold EMS certifications, and they're going to be groomed. I think that's an appropriate term, to help EMS in times when they need surge capacity, because they do have EMS training. Tony, do I have that right?
Yeah, myself and Captain Worth, Director Hall, and Chief Murdoch discussed those options. COVID-19 has changed some rules and regulations with the Department of Health, allows us to use those folks in a surge capacity. And the worst case scenario is our nursing homes do get it, and we need that surge capacity.
Right. Captain Crone, I know you're there. Leon reported that there is a new July Academy at HAC, and they apparently have a lot of applicants so far. And those people, Leon, do I have this right? would probably be available for hire in September or October of this year.
The academy, if they start in July, they would get out of the academy in November. So we would, if we got to the point where we had a list and those people were on the list, we could be making contingent job offers and snag them up just before or just after the Thanksgiving holiday, if things go according to best case scenario.
Okay, good. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. How about Captain Worth? Is he with us tonight?
No.
We're apparently we're in line to get 2 new live-ins with the fire company. Well, Dave talked about the paramedic blood draw, which I think is a great thing that's been approved by the district attorney's office. And that's all I have.
Thank you
very
Vice
much.
President. Thank you, Vice President Black, and thank you very much for that comprehensive report for public safety. All I would have folks to say tonight is a couple things. I echo that this was a good meeting, and I certainly do appreciate the constructive conversation that we can have. In particular, the conversation regarding the 2 stretchers. I have to admit, when I saw that, I just wasn't sure what to think. The first time, I think since I've been on this board, I didn't know how that was going to go down tonight. But I will say that down deep, I knew, because of the professionalism we have in this organization, that there had to be good reason, and that the outcome of it would be right, depending on, or no matter how we came out tonight. And I'll just say to Director Hall and Captain Deven, thanks for pushing through in the face of this crisis and what we know is going to be a financial, at least we're going to have our eyes on the financial crunch, so to speak, perhaps out of COVID now and maybe even years to come. It takes some courage to actually push through that issue and help us to understand it. Commissioner Kutz brings up a good point. The more we have good information coming through, but I think a lot of us were a little bit confused about it. But having that conversation tonight, we really appreciate it. And I know that had the conversation gone logically to get less than those 2 stretchers, I know that you guys would have probably made the best of what you could have for now. But I really appreciate that you pushed through and made us understand what that was really for. Having said that, don't mean to keep the spotlight on you, Captain Deven, but I can't tell you enough how grateful I am. And I know I speak on behalf of many of the residents in the township and most of the board, if not all the board, that we're really happy to have you here with us, and really glad that you act in the professional manner that you do for our township, and appreciate everything that you've been doing for us. My hat's off to all the public safety folks in the township for the work they do, and our staff. This crisis has just been crazy, and I think that sooner than later, we'll have our eyes set on getting back together in person for these meetings, which I think will be really good. But I think this exercise in doing these Zoom meetings in this format has been good for all of us. And to echo what Commissioner Shin said about being able to have some hard discussions, we're going to move forward from the crisis in a good way that we can, I think, communicate really good, particularly going into the next budget season. So having said that, I'll say that the gardens were plowed and marked. So that's terrific down at the community gardens. So I know that people are excited about that, and they've been working on their stuff down there. And other than that, I believe I'll be signing the extension just through the end of this crisis that was presented to me. So I'll come in and get that extension signed. I'm going to wait a couple days on that to see how things take out closer to the 15th, if that's okay.
Well, what we're going to do is we have an extension that would take us to what we hope is the transitional period into the yellow. But then the director and I were talking about another, a secondary sort of declaration, which wouldn't be the emergency, what'd you call it, Dave? The emergency response,
Yeah, it's,
but the follow-up stuffs, which
right.
once we transition to yellow, we may ask you to sign this sort of secondary declaration that would take us to the end of the year.
Oh, okay.
So that two of them coming up. One that's here now for you to stop in and sign at your leisure, which would extend the emergency response to the 15th of June. And then we'll talk about the other one, which would still allow us to. The reason we're taking it to the end of the year is because that is what we anticipate the costs, the recoverable costs will extend to. So it would still allow us to apply for certain recovery costs.
Okay, so that we'll be able to have discussion about that probably at our next meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Mr. President, what we had in our packets indicated that it would be extended until June 4th.
Yes.
But you're going out to the 15th of June.
Right, I was thinking of May 15th. Yes, June 4th.
Right now, the current extension is through May 15th that we agreed to at the last meeting.
Yeah, I see that.
15 in my head, but it's the actual. It actually would extend it out to as long what the governor set right now as the next.
Okay, that would be the 4th.
Which would be
Okay.
the 4th.
All right, just
Okay.
Mr. President.
And I know Commissioner Kutz, it looks like you have another question.
Yeah, just briefly. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring it up before. I was just curious about parks again. I noticed, I believe the state parks are open, and according to the governor's guidelines, they're encouraging people to seek outdoor recreation close to home. So I'm wondering if it would be in line to open parks and leave the playground equipment closed, or if that would still give the manager cause for concern.
I'll be perfectly okay with that. It's a good question. I had it originally to bring up and then it just lapsed, but yeah, I still have a concern about the playground equipment, obviously, and we could take some steps if we have to take that off, but I would hope that we would start allowing people back in the parks again. The other township facilities are still closed to the public. We have most of our staff is coming in now, if not every day, at least some days per week to work in the office, but they're still closed to the public. But as far as the parks go, I think it would be appropriate to start opening them back up a little bit, at least the open areas.
And I'm okay, Mr. President, if he needs any, Mr. Manager, if you need anything from us tonight for direction on that, I'm okay to go along with what you just said.
Yeah, I'm good with that as well.
I just have your assent. I think we can do that.
Yeah, so without objection, we'll just have you do that, Tom.
Put something out tomorrow on. I got a reaction from Commissioner Shin. I like that.
Commissioner Shin's giving us the thumbs up. By the time we master this stuff,
I know, right?
We don't do it anymore. So.
Okay, well, I'll get that information out on social media tomorrow, and I'm sure some folks will be happy to hear about that.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, that's all I had, folks.
Mr. President.
Yeah, good meeting, everybody, and I officially adjourn this meeting.
Okay.
Next time.
Be safe, everyone.
Take care.
Good meeting. Thank you.